What's up, everybody? Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. This video is the first video for 2024 for me. And about a year ago, I had a podcast discussion with Dr. Keith Cheng, and I finally decided to launch it. One of Dr. Keith Cheng's research interests is cancer genetics, which helped him with his discovery of SLC24A5. This is also associated with skin pigmentation. So, jumping right into it,
I'm really glad to talk with you. Really like a lot talking to lay people who have take the bother to actually think about science in a little bit deeper way.
right?
And especially was anxious to talk to you because I get the most new insight by talking to people who are affected the most,
Okay.
by the skin color issue. I had my own version of it, but it doesn't compare to what African Americans dealt with. So, um, I was the only Asian kid in my entire high school, and I knew it a lot. Get beat up and teased and ridiculed in public and stuff like public humiliation and all that stuff happens. So, and you just have to deal with it.
Right.
Um, but it's a whole lot worse to, as we talk to parents of, say, black boys, especially, you gotta be tutored how to deal with police when they stop you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ridiculous to even think you have to do that. But it's the reality today, even today,
Right.
isn't
Right.
it?
Right. It is.
Sickening.
Yeah. I came into this because my curiosity, because of my background. My father is African American, and my mother is German and Turkish. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and then I sent a DNA test of mine or a DNA sample of mine in, and I found out, where everybody, what, a little bit piece of me came from everywhere and stuff. So I was curious, about, skin color, because when I was a little kid, I was always told that the closer you were to the equator, the darker the skin people were, and then the further away
Huh.
the light skin came away. So
That's generally true.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, the if you've read them, there are a lot of reviews about skin color, and there have been papers from the 40s on
Mm.
about that. I forgot the name of that author is a geologist or something, but back in the 40s, he took color tiles,
Mm.
traveled around the world, and looked at people's color and mashed it up and kept record of that. And in general, the people with the darkest color were near the equator. And the interesting backdrop of this, I think you probably picked up on, is that east people in the North and South American continents
Mm-hmm.
came across the Bering Straits, where Alaska is,
Right.
and therefore from East Asia. So their skin color started out probably something lighter. We don't know how light,
Mm-hmm.
because certainly not as light as like a Korean or a Japanese person, but something lighter. And then migrated down south towards the equator. So there, may have been some darkening mutations that got selected, but maybe not, because as you probably know, the original description, and I should send it to you if you don't have it. I have a copy of the original Latin. It's quite profound. Carlos Linnaeus, the Homo sapiens, those two Latin word things,
Right.
how all the species are identified. He wrote that out, and he defined human beings on that page by color, and one of the colors was red,
Mm-hmm.
and that red color is on the basis of the plant dye that the tribal people would paint on themselves in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
That's not their natural skin color. It wasn't red. The red people, it's like Irish, but so it made it, and then the tragedy was that he assigned personality traits and things like intelligence to those colors.
Right.
That was an origin of racism.
Okay.
That was taken as truth by scientists for hundreds of years, and the lay public, and their nursery rhymes around it for hundreds of years, and that laid a very unfortunate firm foundation for racism.
Right.
And I started out in the field not wanting to do any skin color research, honestly, because I frankly was traumatized by it. I didn't want to deal with it. But I was forced into it because I was so curious, and it led to this discovery of this European mutation, exclusively European mutation. And that's also present in South Asians,
Right.
that is people from India. They're basically Europeans also in a way, because they have the root mutation of the later ones anyway. And then I had to go, I'm having to look for now, this is the part that'll be interesting to you perhaps, that we don't know what mutation is resulting in this lighter color.
Right.
And we're still on the search for that. We think we're getting somewhere, but it's in progress, and it's been in progress for way too long. But I'm having to do it on out of pocket. So
And that gene mutation is SLC24A5, right?
that's the name of the gene.
Mm-hmm.
And that you might have seen A111T, and all that refers to the 111 refers to the amino acid position. There happen to be 500 amino acids in that protein.
Okay.
So at position 500, there was an original amino acid symbolized by A, and then it turns it to a T. So that's on the protein level.
Mm-hmm.
On the DNA level, it's something else. So it's all in that science paper, explained very much detail. And the selection, it was such an amazing set of coincidences that everything matched up to the idea that it's the most important gene in the entire genome, only in Europeans, showing selection.
And what do
So
you
there
mean
was
by that?
selection for lighter skin color. Because if I don't know, there's a chart in that science paper that plots the size of the region that is homozygous.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if you select for a mutation, say for homozygosity, that you have two alleles, one from mama and one from papa, right?
Right.
Every gene across you have pairs of chromosomes. So if you select, say, for light color, which requires both of the chromosomes to be light, if you're going to be that light, then all of the other mutations that happen to be along with it will be also homozygous.
Okay.
Right? You're selecting the same piece of DNA, if you will. And so if you have strong selection for a phenotype that you require homozygosity, then the entire region will be homozygous.
Okay.
And so if you compare how large that region is in the entire genome, it's largest right there, like 150 kilobases of DNA, 150,000 bases are almost the same in Europeans, which is really crazy. It would have been, okay, well, that's okay. That's so what? But if you look across the whole genome, that's the largest in the entire genome.
Okay.
So that was striking. And then there are other mutations that make you as light as an Irishman, for example. You have to have a series of other mutations too, like including the SLC45A2 mutation, and for red-haired people, MC1R mutations, some MC1R mutation. And then there are other alleles that can contribute to color. That's why you have a rainbow of colors in every race. There's a range of colors. Southeast Asians all the way to lightest Koreans or something. They'll have a range of mutations that if you pile them on top of each other for lighter color, then that's how you get the lightest.
Okay. And how did this research come about? Because that's very interesting. Where did the idea just come from?
Well, my finding came out of curiosity and coincidence.
Okay.
I was doing cancer research. So we know cancer is a genetic disease. Cancer is a disease in which cells normally have a rule book.
Okay.
The rule books say grow to this amount and then stop, for example. And those genes are utilized during development. So you turn from one cell to all these different cell types that we made of, right? And so they all have to be regulated. They have to know where to go. They have to know what phenotypes to have, whether it be pigmented or not, or make skin or muscle, whatever. And then those are rule books. And so when you have cancer, cells break rules. There are genes that make the cells do something. And if the rule is broken that says stop growing, but it keeps going, and then another rule that says don't invade into something else, which is a normal phenotype during embryogenesis, like the neural crest, it's called.
Okay.
Those are cell types that include pigmented cells. They migrate through other ones.
Okay.
That's normal
Okay.
in development at a specific time, but it's not normal anymore once you have a differentiated cell.
Okay.
So once invasion, metastasis, that kind of thing is not normal, but that can happen in cancer because of mutations that control that.
Okay.
Now, let me get out of that. I went on a tangent there for you. Okay. But the idea is that I wanted to know how those mutations occurred.
Okay.
So when you want to study anything in genetics, it's called forward genetics, you make mutants you ask an organism, how do you do X? And then so what you do is you just randomly mutate and you say, what would happen if X was broken?
Okay.
So for example, pigmentation. How do you control pigment? So you go look for mutants that are lighter color, for example.
Okay.
And then okay, I got some mutant. Now I have to find the gene that's mutant, and that would be a gene, therefore, that controls color.
Okay.
Contributes some way to color. And that's where your one question has to do with albinism.
Right.
Albinism are simply organisms that carry mutations, generally homozygous, that is, both copies are mutant, in a gene that controls color in one way or another. And there are many mechanisms for controlling color, from the making of the pigment to having the melanosomes, the pigmented organelles, or the melanocytes themselves maybe not forming well, or the concentration of the pigment's different, or the color of the pigment's different. There are many different steps that can the weakest link in the chain, if it's broken, can yield a form of albinism. And so you can easily look up albinism, and they'll discuss online, and especially in OMIM, Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man, OMIM, omim.org, and you can type albinism, and it'll give you all the genes that can be mutant that cause albinism. And that can be in squirrels, that can be in humans, it could be any animal you want that's pigmented.
Okay.
There'll be albinism mutations, and they are in the same genes, actually, the same set of genes.
Oh, wow.
In fact, we discovered a new albinism allele, that is a new type of mutation, in the Kalinago, who are on the island of Dominica, which is the first island that Christopher Columbus came to. Now, I think I forgot, I got away from your first question. Your first question was, how did you get into this pigment research, right?
I love how I love how this goes. I love it.
Okay. So I was using a pigment mutation in the zebrafish.
Right. That was one of my questions too.
As my light bulb for telling me I'm mutant, because I wanted to know how mutations occurred, right? So the cells don't go click, hey, I'm mutant, right? You got to have something to look at.
Right.
So it turns out you have these cells called retinal, that is pigmented epithelial cells. So they happen to be in like kitchen tile type of against each other, like polygons, against each other all around the eye. And this one mutation that this scientist found in a pet store, the fish are light at day 2, and then they darken at day 3. And then you can see that those pigmented cells, if you treat an animal that's heterozygous, that it is one good copy and one bad copy, the good copy allows it to be pigmented.
Okay.
Now, if you treat it with, say, a mutagen, some cancer-causing thing, mutagen that mutates DNA, you will get little spots that all the cells are pale. Those spots are where the remaining good copy is now broken, is now mutated. So that was my assay, and I was using that fish from the pet store, and I said, why are they lighter in color when they're adults? So I go, why are they lighter? That's all. I was just curious. Well, why are they lighter? Just like you might walk by something and say, why? And what we learn in cell biology is about electron microscopy. Have you heard of electron microscopy?
No, I have not.
Electron microscopy utilizes electrons, and you can magnify things that are nanometers inside. And what's a nanometer? It's a 10 to the minus 9. So I can explain all that stuff at another time if you like.
Yes, I would.
But I said to say they're really small, so you can basically see only a few cells, and you can see inside of those cells, the pigmented cells have these little cannonball-like things called melanosomes, and that's what you saw pictures of maybe in the science paper.
Right.
And I said, well, what happened in that fish? And it turned so if you know that the pigment is stored in those, you can say, well, the cells could be lighter because there are fewer of those cannonballs.
Okay.
They could be smaller, or there could the paint inside could be a lighter color, right? Any of those three. That's just, basic guesswork from looking at a bucket of balls, right?
Right.
And so it turns out, very oddly, all three of those features were changed in the fish.
Wow.
That is really, it turns out to be very strange, because usually one gene would have sort of one function, it would change one phenotype, more typically, and all three changed. And then what I did is I ran across the hall when I saw that to my dermatology friend, and I pulled out their textbook of dermatology, and I look it up, crazy look up in the index, humans, right? The same three changes occur in Europeans.
Wow.
So then I go, wait a minute. Wait, that's too much coincidence. Maybe every European has a mutation in the same gene as that fish does, as a mutant. So the fish mutation is a separate mutation, and it caused the gene to be less functional. Actually, it turned out to cause the gene to be not functional at all. And the weird thing is that when that gene is not functional, it still makes a little color. In humans, therefore, and that the fish actually grow fine.
Right.
So won't kill anything. Actually, albinism itself is worse because you actually can't see well.
Right.
But so then that means it could be the European gene, because Europeans function fine too. When I looked at the Human Genome Project, there was a project called the HapMap Project. Doesn't matter what the name is, but what they do is they collected all the different kinds of mutations from all over the populations all across the globe. That very summer, they were plotting that online.
Wow.
Little pie charts for this population, that population. For each mutation, are they homozygous or are they heterozygous for each position? And if you looked in the European, they were all one color there. And the Africans and the Chinese and Japanese, those are the four populations.
Right.
European, Chinese, Japanese, and African. That's not a Nigerian, Yoruban population. The Europeans are one color, and the Asians and the Africans were another.
Okay.
All of them. That's like, and if you look anywhere else in the genome, they're like all over the place. Right. The proportion, that proportion, because there's no selection. And in that whole region, in fact, you'll see that's also in the science paper. It's all in there in the supplement or in the original. So we turned out that Europeans all were homozygous for that mutation. And then if you look at if you sequence all vertebrates and you look at the amino acids in that region of that protein, that 500 amino acid protein, they're all exactly the same amino acids except for that one position in Europeans.
Wow.
All vertebrates, all.
And how long do you think this happened? How long ago has this happened? Because I read anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 years. So
no, it was more than that.
More?
Well, we think it was So I actually, so it's an estimate.
Right,
we have an estimate,
right.
Because there's all these mathematical assumptions, and some of them are nonsense. I don't know whether it's true or not. We're guessing. We guess the date by you look at a G3 paper. There's a G3 paper. I asked this question: when did the mutation happen, and where did it happen? It happened in one person somewhere.
Okay.
Isn't that an interesting idea?
Right. That's exactly.
Before then, the mutation didn't occur. And I suspected that every person on the world that has this mutation, it came from one person. How would you know that? You can know that. And here's why. Because that original chromosome had a certain other pattern of changes across the genome, that chromosome. And all you have to do is sequence across that region for all of the chromosomes that exist that have that mutation. And so we cataloged all of them across the world. And it turns out there are specific patterns in specific regions. And then you can infer which ones occurred first.
Right.
And so we found the original chromosome, what it should look like. And the estimate is that the mutation occurred somewhere between the Indian subcontinent and East Africa.
Wow.
And so we estimated Gujarat Peninsula, but that's just an estimate. It could just as well have been, you know, in East Africa, where actually the Maasai, I think it is, have a, I think is it a 50% allele frequency? That's pretty high of that mutation. That's why they're lighter. Or they're, anyway, there are East African populations that have a very high frequency of that European mutation.
Okay.
Yeah. And those people went up into Europe, and I'm thinking that they got up there. So there were two ice ages. You familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
75,000 and 15,000 years ago.
Right.
About. And each time there was an ice age, everything's like miles thick ice. And so people are kind of chased down south of it. And then as they retreats, then people go up north. But the only people that would survive would have lighter skin. And actually that could include, interestingly, the Neanderthals, for example.
Okay.
Or Denisovans. So we're still looking at the question of whether some of those light skin alleles could have been inherited from them, because they did crossbreed with humans, with the modern human.
Wow.
So all this ancient people stuff is kind of interesting, and that's new since my paper came out originally in 2005. So we're right now looking for the East Asian mutation, and we're asking whether that could have originated possibly from one of those old populations.
All right.
That they selected for light skin. They crossed over into humans, and then the modern humans who carried those mutations, light skin mutations, therefore could survive better when they got up further north.
Wow. So
this is kind of profound. So right now that work, for example, on the East Asian skin color allele is not funded either. I have to do it out of pocket.
Oh, you are? Wow.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
I wish I didn't have to, but it's, you know, life. I don't have any Russian bombs coming through my roof, so I'm good, and I can eat, so I'm fine. I'm not freezing to death. I should be happy.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, means something to me that you say that.
I really do, and many people will, because I've been telling people about your research a lot. I have a podcast. It's funny that you say these ancient, ancient past. That's how I got into this. The Sumerians are known as the black-headed people, or that's at least that's what people, the academic scholars, want to tell us. So I always wanted to know, why would a group of individuals identify themselves as the black-headed people?
I don't know is the answer, but my guess is that each cultural group likes to brag about something, right? I'm proud of X characteristic of us, and so they'll call themselves that. You know, China, the word China is Zhongguo. You've seen that square with the vertical line through it,
right?
That means you're in the middle. You're the center of the earth. I mean, you're the center of all attention. And you know, when in the Christian faith, the sun is the center of everything, and the earth is the center of everything. Where everybody thinks they're the center of everything, right. Each people, and that's just the way we are, and it's fun. You know, right. It's natural. We feel better about ourselves when we do that. That's all. The unfortunate part is when you become the center, and then you can take down anybody else and use them. That becomes a problem. Yeah. And in a polycultural society, that doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And that's the journey we're taking in not modern societies that now happen to have airplanes and boats, and cars, and we travel and we mix together now in ways we never did before. And so even though we've evolved ways, so the way I look at it is this is something maybe of interest to you. And I think I wrote that out in the one article, Demystifying Skin Color and Race, is that I've been trying, this is my own way of dealing with racism and how to think about it without going crazy. Everybody, we are selected as every social animal, cats, any herded animal, any social animal, they all are group centric. And all of them have been known to form packs and actually beat up on other members of that, even the same species, right? So even chimpanzees, there's some chimpanzees will kill other tribe members,
Right.
Because for food, say food territorialism, whatever. And for protection, if another group attacks you, you are group centric, you got to protect, right? Yeah, that's normal. So I think that is the native state. And I don't want to even call it, people call it the devil. You don't need to call it the devil. You just say that's, I can explain that on the basis of, I think, evolution that was selected for survival by survival. And if you survive, that means you are actually group centric. Part of group centrism, an expression of group centrism, unfortunately, is racism. But we know that we can get around that because there's something called education. And that's what I think the founding fathers, at least Benjamin Franklin and others, realized, that we could educate ourselves to be able to live together. That's where the hope comes. I never thought that, if you ask me about racism and what are you going to do, what good is it going to do? Yeah. I don't think there's a whole lot of hope lecturing a racist. If they're brought up that way, they learned it. Right. They learned it. I think I'd rather pay attention to the kids. Tell them what we know from the science.
Right. Yes.
Discuss the problems as we are today in society. And I think eventually we're going to come to a better place. But right now we're still new, and it's a raw, and we're fighting it. And so I really am grateful for folks like you.
Thank you. This is an honor. Just speaking to you, just getting the insight from the man himself, it's an honor.
I need to get feel the same. Well, I really pretty impressed that someone from the lay public can do. What is your job? What do you do?
Well, that's interesting you say that or ask that. I was in the military for 13 years. I was wounded in combat in Afghanistan, my last tour. I was blown up actually, and I have a TBI, and amongst a lot of other things. And
TBI is, what's that?
Traumatic brain injury.
Oh no.
Oh yes. Yeah. So I have problems sleeping, but I've always been interested in aliens, God's religion, ancient history, the civilizations, genes, astronomy, physiology. I had interest in so many things. So I just started reading books, and I started with everything with the Sumerians, the ancient Egyptians, the Mesoamericans, the Inuits, the Native Americans, their ancient civilizations. I started with their myths. I just started there, and I just read. I read at least 6 to 8 hours a day, and that's mostly at night.
You know what? I'm honored myself. That's amazing. I'm amazed, and I'm so sorry about the brain injury. Then you had to go to Afghanistan and get blown up there and fight over there. Oh boy.
Yeah, and I just picked up this hobby, and it led me to you. Honestly, it led me to you.
Good hobby, man. I love it.
I read a lot about so many different things, peer-reviewed articles, history buffs. I've read almost everything I could have from you. I have them saved on the hard drive, all your articles and everything that I could find about you. So I have all your stuff, and it means a lot to me because it helps me with my piece of information, like with the ancient civilizations, the ancient Egyptians. Many people don't believe the ancient Egyptians were black back then. And I always wondered why, if they were on the continent of Africa, and if haplogroup E1B1B was the last haplogroup to leave Africa, then I wondered, where did the lighter skin come from? Because from what I understand, haplogroup E1B1B left Africa around 26,000 years ago, I believe. And when I read that, I don't know how accurate or true that is, but when I read that, I thought that was pretty interesting.
I want to know the genotype at the skin color alleles for the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians. I mean, they have mummies. Can they get any DNA out of it? They must. I don't know.
They said
did they sequence them? Somebody must have sequenced them.
They, from what I
No?
understand, their haplogroups are R1b and E1b1b, and I don't know if you can determine skin
So
color.
are you
But
talking about mitochondrial haplotypes? Because what I
yes,
need to know is actually the genomic. So that's the mitochondrial DNA. That's
yep,
the, the
mm-hmm.
only the mom transmits.
Yep.
So the question is, what are the skin color alleles are actually autosomal genes that's
Mm-hmm.
on the regular chromosomes, not the mitochondrial chromosomes, which are inside the mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be really interested in what those alleles are. I am embarrassed. I don't know. So I now got to go find out, unless you find out. So I love. I want to understand this too.
And that's where my interest came from, because I understand that the closer you were to Africa, or the center of Africa, the dark you were. And I understand that North Africa, they were still like dark skin. So I wanted to know when from what I understood, their haplogroups from when they went, because you talked about them going to Europe. I know Africans, or they left Africa to go to Europe sometime. I can't remember the time date, but I know that first Europeans were actually African people. So,
Of
and
course.
you talked about the ice ages. I understand both the ice age time frame. So I always wanted to know, how did the white skin came about? Because when people look at my mom, they look at her and they look at her sometimes, and she's really dark skinned sometimes, and sometimes she's just a little bit lighter. But it's just interesting to see how colors of the shades of colors can change. And I always wanted to know, how many different shades how many different shades of blacks there was, the black color were, because some dark Hispanic people don't consider themselves black, and some like Dominicans, they don't consider themselves black. So I was like, well, what's the scientific definition of black? Because it's so weird.
And it's not a sign. So we actually have this very, very very topic. We're supposed to submit a paper next week,
Oh wow.
and actually an old version of it, very old version of it, it's much improved now, is on bioarchives, but it's about the Kalinago in Dominica.
Okay.
So here's a fun part that I'm going to tell you about. That's an inside story. When I went there, the native population. So Dominica is a country run by ancestors of former slaves.
Okay.
And the Native American people were kind of chased into the hills, and they were down to only 300 left at one point.
Okay.
They were killed off otherwise. And then the primary admixture is with some of the first Maroons, some West African slaves that went in there. And so when you go to their tribal council, you've got the whole range of people who look like me, all dark, a little darker, all the way to African looking people.
Mm-hmm.
And they call themselves black based on basically just first glance.
Mm-hmm.
So brothers and sisters
mm-hmm.
in the same family could easily be called one or another background just because of their appearance.
Okay.
How curly their hair is,
right.
How dark the skin is. And so black, there are lots of definitions. So you're familiar with colorism in amongst blacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
The comb test, the brown paper bag test kind of stuff. So if you're darker than this color, you can't go in the church. Oh my God, it's crazy. I'm just doing it to yourself, kind of, and Asians do that too. So there is colorism even amongst the natives there, and they actually it was really bizarre. They were talking in this pidgin language, and the chief, who was part both, was making fun of one of the tribal members who was a woman who looked more African. Oh my God, you're doing that in front of me? So it's crazy.
Yeah.
They were named the Caribs.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked up the word Carib, it actually derives from a Spanish word that implies that they're cannibals.
Okay. Yeah.
And cannibalism was used as an excuse to kill them off, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them that, and I said, is there another name you could use instead of Carib? And they came up with Kalinago, and I think they changed the name to Kalinago territory later on.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I think it was because I raised that question.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have put that in. I can't remember anymore. It's so long ago, but I think I put that in that paper.
Yeah, the carrots. Yeah, I
Book
think I
that
remember.
book chapter. And by the way, the author of that book is an African American. He's a
Oh,
sociologist.
oh wow.
Wrote about racism, right?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. He was one of my favorite people to interact with by from another field by chance. He's a sociologist, right? So that's kind of cool.
That's awesome. Oh yeah, what's the latest thing you've learned about SLC24A5 that you can
Oh,
share that you haven't shared yet?
the most common thing I share with people is the fact that we still don't understand, as many years later as this is,
Mm-hmm.
we still don't know the molecular mechanism, even though we know what the gene is, that regulates the number of melanosomes, their size, and the amount of pigment inside. All three of those change. That's still a mystery.
Okay.
And it's striking that that's the case, despite science as advanced as it is. And there's going to be a lot of cell biology involved that is not the main focus these days, it seems. We're molecule obsessed at the moment.
Mm.
And molecules have to be correlated with phenotype. And so that's kind of my whole other journey that's not related to skin color particularly, but it's another battle I'm trying to fight, which is we don't, toxicology
Mm-hmm.
is a field where you try to infer what side effects might occur in a human if you look at a model system, say a mouse or a fish or whatever, or Daphnia even. And we've never had a systematic way using a computer to objectively look at the phenotypes that is the effects on all the different cell types and all the different organ systems.
Mm-hmm.
We do it piecemeal. We do it with 1 or 2% of the whole sample, and you only got these thin slices of one thickness, and you're supposed to make these deep inferences, and there's no complete way to do it. Well, we figured out how to make, so I figured out we need to do a 3D version of that, and we figured that out. It's a whole nother line of work that I do. Look at chenglab.io. There are some pretty pictures in there, because one of my new goals in life is to make people happy with a sense of stimulating a sense of wonder, because I read somewhere that one of the keys to happiness, well, one of the statistical associations with happiness is a sense of wonder. And I think you have that.
Thank you.
Don't you?
Yes.
Why this? Why this? Why this? Why this? And then you find out stuff. Oh, that's how that works, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So that like keeps you going.
Yes, it does. That's why I read a lot. I'll tell you, when I was a little kid, I never used to read books. I used to watch documentaries, but I never used to read books. Now I'm reading like 2 or 3 books a week, just flying by. Like I used to watch TV and play video games and stuff like that. I've replaced all that with just reading, and I feel like I'm playing catch up. But it feels good because the hard work is already done. People did the research. All I got to do is just read it and put the puzzle pieces together myself.
So I have a question for you then. How have you actually tried to see whether you could spread that habit, and how you could spread that habit, how you could make it respectable to read? So the reason I ask you that is one of my former students was an African-American student from Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And the way she put it is she said, "This teacher saved my life."
Mm.
Now that's an exaggeration. That's what words she used, because she was, it was the Detroit ghettos,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very much not respected to be good at school.
Mm-hmm.
You were kind of beat up and stuff if you were good in school. So that's got to change, man.
Yeah.
How can that change? That's can't be my job. Then nobody will listen to me. But what can be done to, because that's the way you get out.
Mm-hmm.
If I were a member of the African American community, actually, and I've been a member of the Chinese community before, and the way Asians got out is we studied our butts off,
Mm-hmm.
and you just somehow get yourself as good as possible. It's still not great because there's still a glass ceiling for us, but it's a hell of a lot better. And I'd love to see some, the problem is that on African American communities, there's a lot of victimization of males in particular. That makes me sick. And I don't know, that can't be really fixed until that goes away better. But it's getting slowly better. I don't know. What do you think what one could do? Is there any good way to do it or not?
No, but I will tell you that I spread my information through my website. I actually take everything. I went and bought my own web domain and everything, www.rebirthoftheword.com, and everything that I've learned about our ancient history, astronomy, and everything that I possibly can learn, I put it on there for other people to read. And it does feel good when somebody says, "Hey, I read your article and and you sound really good," because I don't have a college degree. I spent most of my time in the military. My first 10 years in the military, I was deployed more than I was in the United States, So I deployed back to back to back. And then I got wounded my last one. So my mind doesn't work as good. I can't be around in a school setting, and I can't sit down long enough to pay attention to somebody on the computer or, if it's not interesting to me, then I won't pay attention to it so much. So I just started reading books like from people like you. Like when I read your article, I started reading about Darwinism and all that stuff. I started reading everything that I could. I know not everything is accurate, but it's as close as it can be. And plus, we're using today's science like yours today to determine what was possibly back then, and it helps me understand, and it helps me, throughout my night, because like I said, I don't sleep at night. I actually been up, I've been up for 24 hours now. I usually am up so many hours that it's crazy, because I have a hard time sleeping, like a really bad time sleeping. I have restless leg syndrome, which is really bad. And I have severe PTSD. So I needed to do something to occupy my mind. And that's when I just got into the ancient history stuff. And I just created my website, and I created at least 19 blog articles. My website, I've heard people say your website looks very professional. And then I have a YouTube and a podcast. So I do things at night and spread the information. And a lot of people take my stuff and they go research it for themselves. Like I've been telling people about this discussion that me and you was going to have, and I told people, because a lot of people are interested in the same thing that I am, so I pass your work on to them and everything else that I've learned. So it's just it helps me, and I know it helps other people, because other people tell me, just like you helped me. You gave me an outlet. You gave me time. You occupied my mind. You occupied my thoughts. You gave me something to think about, research, understand. And now I'm here talking to the man himself, you, Dr. Keith Cheng, about this. So it's an honor. You have no idea that I know people they do things for likes nowadays. I do this to help people. My whole point is to help people understand where we came from.
You're the kind of person I want to talk to. So many people do things only what's good for them.
Yeah.
I don't talk to them. I don't want to talk to them.
Like my website has no advertisements or anything. I get really upset when I go to these history things, and I see nothing but pop-up articles and advertisements and stuff like that. I cleared, away from that. I don't want none of that to do with my website. I've had people say, "Why don't you monetize your website? It's really good." No, I do not want to monetize it. I want people to know that I'm sincere about what I'm sharing. This is not me giving you my opinion.
Not biased in some way.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because money.
Good for you. I'm happy to be associated with you. So let's see. One last thing I thought I'd mention that I have to work it out myself. Actually, National Geographic. Did you see the National Geographic special article?
No.
On race and skin color?
No, but I'll definitely look it up.
They interviewed with me.
Okay.
And they come up with a conclusion I disagree with. That race has nothing to do with genetics. What? So let me share this last story with you, and then I'll leave that thought with you is an interesting thing. When I was preparing my work, I was writing it up, and I gave a talk at Penn State University Park, and I had people lining up to talk with me afterwards, and they were kept saying this: they're going to tell you your work has to do with race. And it's yes. And they basically said, you got to be careful and just tell them it has nothing to do with race. And I'm thinking in my head, you want me to lie to people? Your grandma can tell me it has to do with race. Are you going to tell me to tell them it's nothing to do with race when it does have to do with it? It's not that it is not the equivalent. Skin color is just the first impression you get of somebody, along with everything else, this whatever, and it doesn't even matter what all the physical phenotypes are genetically determined.
Right.
Period. People's layering on top of that their own all their own superstitions and their own guesses about people, their assumptions, that's a whole nother ballgame. That's sociology. That's something else. So yes, it's not equivalent, it's not the same, but it has a component. To deny it has any component in it is a lie. And I don't think that's an honest way to teach about race and skin color.
Wow.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There are components that people misuse. There are genetically determined. That doesn't mean that it's not genetically determined anymore just because you want to avoid race as a topic.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. You're lying about the science and to just avoid a problem.
Yeah.
And then it's not convincing, and you're doing a disservice to science, and you're doing disservice to people, I think.
Absolutely.
They never asked me about it. They just said, used my work to say it has nothing to do by just citing that there are, here's the common thing. Lewontin, you may have read about, said that there's more difference between African tribes than there is between an African and a German or something.
Right.
And while that may be true, that doesn't mean that genetic differences mean nothing. I mean, I'm sorry, if you have albinism, if you have a genetic disorder of any sort, then you have that genetic disorder. It only had to do with one gene, and it did something. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter. What matters is whether you have a phenotype and whether it hurts your health or whether it affects your future. So it does matter. So that's what I've come to believe, and I took a lot of thinking, and I kind of take a little bit of offense at people just saying it's okay to interview me and then make a conclusion that they didn't even bother to check with me that in any way that whether I had a comment on it or whether I agreed with the main conclusion of an article. So I'm kind of don't know how to deal with it, to be honest with you. I don't want to seem like a snot or or obnoxious or a bad person or some way, or rude. But on the other hand, I don't think it's right to let it go. So I'm still figuring out what to do.
Right.
I'm not sure. I want, in the end, when I'm all done with this life, I want to make sure I leave it in a way that is hopefully thought out and is effective.
Oh, your legacy will continue. This will continue. You will be remembered for thousands of years. Trust me. You said, the most important thing is, why do we have the skin color that we have? And that's everybody's question. Why? Because of religion also. They want to know what was the color of God. God said he created us in the likeness of himself.
I think one thing
an argument.
Then you know what? I want to make one more pass on one fundamental piece of knowledge that I'm hoping it'll be helpful. I answered that question to you. I hope it's somewhat clear. Mutation. There was an old question of whether mutations are directed or whether they're spontaneous.
Yes.
The paper that answered that question is the Luria-Dolbruck experiment. So this is a guy who started out in astronomy. He actually almost failed his exams because he didn't study. And And so what they did is they asked, so when you plate bacteria out on an antibiotic plate, you have, say, a billion bacteria.
Right.
You plate them on a plate, there'll be some colonies come up that are resistant to the antibiotic, right? So the question is this: did that bacterium that's resistant exist before there was antibiotic?
Yes.
And was it already resistant, or did it become resistant because it was exposed to the antibiotic?
Right.
Do you know the answer?
No.
You know the answer?
No, I don't. But I can guess.
It pre-existed.
It pre-existed.
Mutations are random.
Okay. Random.
Mutations are kind of random. So you might get more of this culture, more or less in another culture, but they're random. And the way they did that is they did something called replica plating. So you literally take what's it called? Velvet.
Oh yeah, velvet. Yeah, there we go. That was
so you can sterilize velvet, and then you take car pistons, literally car pistons, and you rubber band that on there, and they're sterile. And you take your bacterial plate that has all these colonies on it, and then you touch it to that, and therefore you have each hair got some bacteria on it, right? And you plate it on a regular plate, and then you plate it on a bacterial antibiotic resistant antibiotic plate.
Okay.
And you will get resistant colonies from something that had no exposure before.
Okay.
For example, anyways, so they have fancy ways to. There were two types of experiments, and Larry Delbruck proved that it's random, and that's a fundamental thing. So it's not determined by, say, God or somebody wanting some resistant thing to happen. Right. It's by chance, and then there's natural selection. And if there was an advantage, then you get that. If there was no advantage, then you don't get that. So that, there are colored, like the moths changed colors, remember, during the Industrial Revolution. Did you see about that? There were dark moths came up in London during the Industrial Revolution, and the reason is they were there before. Right. But they weren't selected for. There's soot all over everything.
Right.
You want to escape the pigeons eating you, and you're dark, and you match the background, then you're not going to be eaten as much. And so, guess what? There were many more of those.
Right.
That's a sort of unnatural selection, if you will. It's a natural selection by the pigeons, but it's unnatural because of the pollution. But so there's tons of examples like that, and there's little mini evolutions, and that's how the finches, different with the different beaks, came out, right? So, yeah, this is fascinating stuff. And a key component of that is I want everyone to understand that mutation is random, and it's chance that you got a certain way. And do you use the golden rule, man? That's the general one I follow. If you don't want to be treated that way, then don't treat other people that way.
Right on.
You don't want to be put down because you happen to be born a certain way, then don't do that to anybody.
Right.
So that's as simple as that. That's what I try to preach to my kids.
Thank you.